Hi, welcome to AI Impacts. Today, we discuss the impact AI is having on the role of the account executive. My name is Dean Hanson. I'm joined, as always, by George Little.
Hello, hello.
And this week's expert guest is Awonke Phewa. Awonke is a strategic account executive at UIPath, the intelligent automation company. Hi, Awonke, and welcome to AI Impacts.
Thanks, Dean. Thanks for having me. Hey, George, what's going on?
Hello, hello. Welcome. Glad you could do this.
Very welcome. Awonke, to kick things off, could you please give the listeners a quick overview of you, your role, and your experience?
Yeah, sure thing. So as Dean, as you mentioned, I'm a strategic account executive at UIPath. We're an intelligent automation company. And essentially what that means is that we're at the intersection of AI and automation. We started off as purely a robotic process automation company, and over the last decade or so have evolved and shifted the platform into an AI-driven one. And what I do, what that title means essentially is trying to help clients understand where the manual, repetitive, less valuable work is so that their clients can their employees can focus on things that are much more valuable, things that humans really signed up for the job to do, as opposed to spending their time doing endless spreadsheets and data crunching.
So what sort of companies are your customers or clients?
So I'm responsible for two industries right now, energy and utilities, and I cover North America. So that's the US and Canada. But the company as a whole, we're industry agnostic. This technology really applies to any industry more broadly.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Well,
I think one of the things that immediately you mentioned that I'd love to dive into is the difference, as you say, between AI and automation. I think that's one of the big pieces that defines what you're selling and what your role is. So can you just give us a sense, a little bit of kind of like what the difference is there?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. The way that I like to think about it, and it's probably the easiest analogy, is that artificial intelligence is the brain, right? That's where data is kind of sourced, thought about, manipulated, surfaced, and automation is the limbs, right? It's the rest of the body. So what automation does is drive the activities, whereas artificial intelligence is more based around decision making, decision rules, etc. And so from a practical, if we take a step down into that, a practical example of that might be, if you think about ChatGPT, for example, right? You go into ChatGPT, you ask some questions, formulates a response, and you have the data. Automation plays a role in terms of what to do with that data.
Gotcha. So what are some of the tools that you have been using on your day-to-day?
Day-to-day, so the really cool thing about working with at UiPath is that we have a suite of products and we drink our own Kool-Aid, right? So there's a couple of homegrown tools that we use with the UiPath platform. One of the things that I use on an almost everyday basis is what we call our autopilot. And you will see, versions of this from other providers. Microsoft has a Copilot. We have an autopilot. The way that I use it is that I can talk to this chat box interface to surface data from multiple different data streams and data sources, whether that be my CRM system, whether that be, a company's 10Ks, if I'm looking to do financial research, or any other system of record that we have internally. I tend to use that for client preparation. If I'm doing some stuff in terms of creating presentations, really trying to figure out how we can get that data at the fingertips of sellers and get them to do less of that manual work so that, they can accelerate and spend more time with their clients.
So that might give you, that must give you like a lot of like in-depth firsthand experience of how to actually use the product that you're selling, I'm assuming, right? Or like an easy way to explain the use case of it, right?
Yeah, and I mean, this is all still so new, so in depth might be a little strong, but 100%, right? The most powerful tool that we have when engaging with clients, especially new ones, is to talk them through and walk them through stories of how we are using our own tools, right? Because if we weren't, that would raise a pretty big question of like if we weren't using our own tools. So yeah, it does give a lot of in-depth experience. I get to see some stuff firsthand that is honestly mind-blowing. It's such a fast-paced space, and it's really cool to be kind of front and center of it.
Yeah.
And in terms of any additional tools that you use, like I don't know, even in hobbies or interests or private life as well as your work situation.
Yeah, I'm sure you guys get this answer a lot, but ChatGPT in terms of generative AI is a really good one. Initially I experimented it a lot. I like to write sometimes in my spare time, and I found it a really good tool to kind of condense material, right? These days you can find data so easily on Google. The challenge that I have is kind of truncating it into like a kind of cohesive format. And there's a lot of people writing LinkedIn posts using ChatGPT. You can kind of see the formulaic outline. Yeah. I would say that's probably not the right approach to use it. That formulaic outcome, however, is a really good way to inspire you to then kind of further analyze and put your own voice into it. So ChatGPT is a great tool. I love it. I've experimented just a tad with like DALL-E and some of the AI image generators. But really, those three are kind of the big, broad buckets, right? So just to recap, it's kind of generative AI solutions, the AI automation platform that UiPath serves, and sometimes just toying around with those image generators.
So, you mentioned obviously that, you sell, I keep saying, I'm going to stop that. You mentioned that you sell these solutions to your customers and it allows them to reduce a lot of the grind. Could you give an example of how much effort it allows them to reduce, I guess, on a daily basis or on average?
I'm going to give you the consulting answer and say it depends because it really does. Okay. It depends on the use case and the application. And I think I should correct myself in that, the foot in the door is a lot of that replacing some of that mundane activity. Because from an employee experience standpoint, people join companies for a certain reason, right? And they chose their profession for a certain reason. But if we were to poll 100,000 people, I don't think very many of them would say that they chose their profession because they love to, do the same thing day in, day out, 5 days a week, right? So as a foot in the door, we can reduce anything that is robotic, that is manual, that is rules-based. And basically, because we are automating from both a UI and API standpoint, essentially anything that a computer touches, you can eliminate almost 100% and then only have a human in the loop to validate certain sensitive things. So for example, if you can automate an entire kind of invoice processing process, right? And then you might want to have just that human in the loop to kind of validate. So some use cases, you can take the human out of it for 99%, and others that might be a little bit more nuanced, a little bit more complex, or you have more compliance or regulatory checks and balances. Although you could automate for business rules and business contexts, you may want to kind of reduce that. And so
well, just I have a question about just the actual human that's involved in these, right? I'm assuming that some of these processes might be replacing or are literally replacing human tasks. That is literally the selling point, right? But when it comes to the person who has to manage it or effectively audit what it's doing, do you find that human has to either learn new skills, or does the company have to find someone who has an expertise in this, or is it something that's really tailored to the current employee? Like, how aggressive effectively is this AI installation within the company?
Man, that is such a good question that requires a layered answer. I think I'm going to start by addressing the very large elephant in the room, right? One of the most common experiences that I see in my clients, especially if they're like lagging adopters of innovation and technology, is this fear that automation is designed to replace humans, right? And it's initially on the surface, it's a very well-warranted fear. Most of us have watched The Terminator, most of us have watched The Matrix, most of us have watched these like dystopian future movies or read novels, etc. And so we have that in the back of our minds. The way in which we position UiPath and the reason why I joined, George, from our work together in previous lives, I'm a huge advocate for employee experience and for positive change management. The reason why I joined UiPath is that, nobody wants to do that repetitive robotic work, and they would rather apply their unique skill sets to something that makes them feel alive at work, something that they're contributing either strategically or something else other than that robotic stuff. And I'll give you a perfect example. I'm client-facing. I love talking to clients. That's what gets me up every day. When you and I used to work at Remesh, every Friday I'd block 2 hours on my calendar to update Salesforce. Go through my calendar, note down what meetings I was in, and I hated it, right?
It sounds like a lot of fun. I'm not sure why
who doesn't love CRM, right? I mean,
my God, yeah. What an exciting Friday. Every Friday.
Every single Friday. Each to their own.
Yeah.
But, that is a task that I would love to automate, and I have automated in my current role, right, to a certain degree. And what that does is that it gives me back, maybe not 2 hours, maybe an hour and a half of time that then I can focus that time on what I love to do more, which is be in front of clients. So not only do I get to focus on what I want to do, but the company ends up creating more productivity. And that's really the essence of what intelligent automation is about.
It reminds me when I was a sales executive for a software consultancy, I hated doing CRM updates. I struggled to keep them up to date. My deals were never at the right stage. And when it came to sales meetings, I was always being interrogated. And I said, look, why do I have to do this CRM update? Because it doesn't make any difference. Like if I close the deal, I close the deal. And my CEO at the time said, okay, if you don't want to do CRM updates, how about this? We'll not pay you your salary. We'll only pay you if you close deals. And then I started doing so funny. Automation would have been a benefit for me then. Yeah. So in terms of the obviously that's the benefits that the clients see, that you see. And when you are using these tools, or when your clients are using these tools, are they compounding multiple tasks together and like clicking to run a suite of tasks off in one go that are all automated and all got AI, and they have to have checks at various different points on the stage, or how does it work?
I can tell you the ideal state, and I can tell you what I see the most of. So the ideal state is very much what you just described: automating an entire process, or automating as much of an entire process as possible, right? However, what we see on the ground, what I see a lot of on the ground, is because this is still relatively nascent technology, and because of the tech boom, right? You have companies that have so much technical debt, so many different applications, they end up cobbling together solutions, different point solutions throughout that process. And so what I see the most of is what I like to think of as kind of like mini automation with various different tools. They might be automating a certain part of the process with NetSuite, might be automating another part of the process with Salesforce, then another one with like SAP BTP, and then something else. And that's a nightmare. That's a CIO's nightmare. They want to kind of reduce that technical debt. Now, the ideal state, and one of the reasons why I love UiPath is that it's not a system of record, right? And it's not a point solution. It's basically a software robot that is an employee that does that whole task across all these different systems and applications for you. And then that frees up that human to either do validation or to allot their time to something else. It's funny, we actually we have our own digital workforce at UiPath. Every robot like has names.
Oh my God. That is so funny.
This is getting onto those AI girlfriends we were talking about the other day.
or the what is the ride? There was an automated ride sharing system or the automated cars in San Francisco that all have their own names. And it was funny until they started like running over people. And then it was like,
oh, wow,
rice, or whatever these like random things were, like Beanie Baby was running over people or whatever. But to that end though, I mean, I think there's something interesting about you even referring to them as like another workforce, like that it's not an AI workforce, it's like a robotic one or bots or whatever. It's kind of like an interesting way of setting it up. So, does everyone sort of have their own army of them and like within your peers and stuff? And do you make them kind of per task, or is it something where it's sort of one thing that continues to learn more and more tasks as it goes?
Gotcha. So not everybody has a robot, right? I don't have a robot. I have an assistant which has some automation within it, right? But the grand vision of UiPath is a robot for every employee, right? To give every employee superpowers to make them more productive, etc. And so that's kind of like the large scale vision. To answer the second piece of your question in terms of the learning component, the reason why we like to refer to these robots as sort of a digital workforce, it's more so to have an easily relatable example of the capability of what this robot can and can't do. Gotcha. So anything that an employee can do in terms of providing that employee access, right? Or if this employee works in HR and they required access to sort of HR data lake, but they're not allowed into the IT data lake, you can assign all of those rules and all of the functions that that human can do. You can create the robot to do those things. The interesting piece that you mentioned is around learning. Yeah. And that moves away from the core robotic process automation into the realm of artificial intelligence and machine learning, right? And as I'm sure you guys are aware from your prior conversations, when it comes to that, that's really about the cleanliness of the data, the rigor of your training model, and your sample size. And so you can teach a model to do or interpret data in a certain way. Yeah. And once that interpretation is complete, you can then create rules-based actions, and that's what serves as the automation. So when you put those two things together, it's really powerful. Because without the automation piece.
So I was going to say, where do you generally pull that data from to feed into the AI?
Another good question, and that also depends, right? It depends on the governance and the protocols of a particular company, right? One of the big things on executives' mind is data privacy, right? Data privacy. That's why some companies have even stopped employees from accessing ChatGPT through their own devices, and that's because there's this risk of like sensitive information going in and out of the company. So you can set up a custom bespoke model that only works within the confines of your data pool as a company. Or you can set up a more general one like the one that I use, my Autopilot, which can not only look at data internally, but also look at public data, like a company's financials, or cross-reference certain Google searches and bring up the most authentic ones based on a predefined set of metrics, right? So it depends, but that's the cool thing. You can kind of create your own adventure to a certain extent.
And would you, if you were a company, obviously you say, companies in the energy and the utilities sectors, if you were positioning the product to a company in one of those sectors, would you have like a pool of data that's sort of shared across everyone in that sector? So it's like common data that, is unique to that sector. It's broader than just their company, but it's not the whole
like industry
world.
Benchmarks or something.
Yeah.
A combination. So if we're having our first ever conversation, right, I would probably want to come prepared with some insight that I've gleaned from your public statements, your 10K, your shareholder meetings. That gives me a little bit of understanding of like where the pain might be, so that I come in with a certain point of view of how AI and automation might be able to help, then use that conversation to validate and get your opinion of whether I'm on the right track. Once we've kind of figured that out, only then can I determine what might be the right path towards, some kind of solution. And I'll give you an example. I went to visit a client a couple of months ago, and we did this really cool proof of concept with a certain capability that we call communications mining. Won't go into the rabbit hole, but this is essentially a tool that allows you to sift through various types of communications, emails, tickets, anything written, and give you analytics on it, use natural language processing to understand intent, etc., and then give you recommendations and triage if necessary. And what we did is, I personally hate giving canned demos. So what we did was ahead of time, we're like, give us data from your website. We found that their marketing team was trying to, improve their e-commerce experience. We're like, okay, give us data from your website. Give us, and we'll analyze it. And we ended up in that demonstration showcasing specific feedback with a large sample size and I won't share directly what the feedback was, but with really great insight in terms of like what the pain points would be from this outside-in analysis that we did. And it was really fun to kind of see the marketing person in the meeting being like, yep, that's spot on. Like, yeah, we need to work on that. So
it's really validating.
Yeah, it is, and it's fun, right? Like it's fun because it's such a new space, and there's opportunities to like do some cool shit,
Yeah. So I had this idea. It's kind of linked to this. It was a conversation I was having yesterday or the day before with one of my old colleagues, who I used to work with when I worked in the SAP space, and a lot of companies implement SAP. And while they're implementing, there are obviously forks in the road as they go down a path where they have to make decisions, and they have to base those decisions on, I don't know, generally like do some analysis internally. They procrastinate, they sort of hold off on making decisions because it's very tough. And what I was thinking was it would be a fantastic idea if you had like an AI, even just a chatbot who was fed the data from, as many SAP implementations as possible to understand what people did, what problems it led to, what's the best choice to make at this point of an implementation. So it's like your implementation helper that would allow them to just seamlessly, rather than having to struggle to make decisions, that have a genuine sort of resource they could call on. Anyway, that's a kind of linked idea. So
yeah, it's interesting.
It's a great idea. It's interesting because we recently partnered with SAP last year, and the big thing right now is moving from legacy SAP ECC into S4HANA, which is essentially their cloud instance.
Evergreen.
Exactly. And it's really interesting to hear you talk about that, because very loosely, the recommendation and the direction of the industry is going to intelligent automation in the front end to help accelerate and make some of those decision points easier, and keep what's called a clean core, right? The biggest challenge people have is that they've got all of these different customizations over 20, 30 years, and it's just a mess. Yeah. And then they go to their automation team or their IT team, and they're like, "Can you please fix this?"
You sometimes need to start from scratch, right, with those systems.
Yeah, exactly.
I know that it's one of the things that this S4HANA, this evergreen sort of public cloud-based approach with scheduled releases is it puts a lot more of the onus on your integration points rather than your customization. So you keep everything as standard as possible, and you change how you integrate to your external systems. Rather than customizing the internal to suit your integrations. But yeah, that's by the by. I think we're on a tangent now.
Yeah, that's a good one. Nothing wrong with that. I'll bring us back a little bit because I think some of this we're dancing around a little bit of the AI bot feeling issue about like, what does it feel like to actually work with these bots or to use them or to build them? So I'm going to just jump right into it, Awonke. Do these things make you feel guilty for not doing all of the work that you used to do?
Oh, hell no. Not at all. I used to spend a month on account planning. My whole month of February last year was just spent on account planning. And now, it's the 9th of February, and I have the majority of the information that I need to like be successful. So I don't feel guilty. I feel great that the company's invested in these tools because it allows me I get a month back. I get a whole month back to actually start doing the work, right?
And does it give you a thrill to use AI like it did the first time you started using AI?
The first time, so my first introduction to AI was when I joined Remesh, 2018, end of
18, I was
2018.
going to say, yeah.
Yeah. And it's really funny because a lot of people just think that AI is something that was invented last year. But introduction was 2018. And I remember this is, really more honestly like a combination of machine learning and natural language processing rather than, cognitive AI in any sense. But I remember just being completely amazed about how far technology had come. And I had this feeling of like, we live in a sci-fi novel. Like, this isn't real.
Yeah.
I'm a character in a book.
Yeah.
And like this.
Right.
Yeah.
And there's, I still keep that whenever like a really cool new capability. I felt that way with communications mining, for example. So it's really fun to work and live in a time where you have these more and more often, these like seeming leaps in technology, and ChatGPT was another one that everyone is familiar with by now. But I'm sure the first time that you started playing with it was like
every time,
this is
even now.
Yeah. So I still keep a lot of that joy for sure.
Yeah.
I can totally relate to the remesh thing too. That surprise, because it reminded me of when I remember when like the iPad came out, and I was like, this is the future. Like there are so many TV shows where someone's flying through space and they're tapping things and stuff's happening around.
Like 2001: A Space Odyssey.
Exactly. Yeah. Right. And so all of a sudden it's here. Hopefully the iPad behaved better than that system did, luckily. But like that the remesh platform was that using early pieces of what's now part of this bigger cognitive AI, right? The natural language processing and being able to, the system was organizing thoughts based on similarity to other thoughts, even though that system didn't know what those thoughts were. It just knew that they were similar by the nature of how other people were interacting with it. And it's interesting now to jump, 5 years from that, and every one of those lines that someone's putting in, the thing could just go, oh yeah, I know, I probably could do a diagnostic on like this person's childhood based on the way that they responded to this market research poll or something. Anywho, but so I'm going to get a little bit darker then. We've talked a lot about the positive impacts. You're clearly bullish on AI, I would say. What about the negative impacts that you've experienced? How have you experienced?
What I would say is, I would say specifically to your role as an account exec, what is the biggest negative from AI?
So can I separate my response into two distinct parts? I'll talk about negative experiences, which is short, but I think the question will be better served by like some of my fears. Because truth be told, I haven't had a ton of negative experiences. The most negative experience actually don't have anything to do with the technology, but rather to do with the learning curve, the amount of misinformation in the market, and the amount of FUD as well, right? And so it's more an issue of communication, knowing where to find the right resources and the right partners, and putting in place really good governance and really good training programs within companies. But that doesn't actually have anything to do with like the intrinsic nature of the tools,
Sure.
right?
Yeah.
And so those are people problems, for lack of a better
Yeah.
word. However, and maybe I'm lucky, maybe I'm in a minority, I don't know. But I do have some very real fears about the progression of AI and where we could go. And some of those are existential, right? But a lot of them are much more tangible. And I'll stop bearing the lead here. I think the big existential one is the challenge that has always existed through humankind, is that the people with the keys have a lot of power to do what they want, right? When we think about these large companies that have so much of the world's data and the potential of what AI could do, to either subtly or very overtly impact the average person, like that is a scary notion, because, and especially when it's in the public sector, where there's a profit motive, because what history has taught us is that profits will come before social responsibility. And I'll maybe take a little bit of a tangent here and talk a little bit about open AI, and give a little bit of my thoughts when that whole debacle around Sam Altman getting let go was happening. And there's still a lot of obfuscation, and there's not a lot of clarity in terms of what happened. But when I saw that the board, right, whose main responsibility was to ensure that the development of their product was meant for good over profit, and that he was being removed, I was like, hey, that's kind of refreshing. I don't know what Sam Altman said or did, but like a board acting for public good, seemingly acting for public good, frankly, you don't see that. I've been in the corporate space for a while. You don't see that very often.
Sure.
And what happened is that within 24 hours, he jumped ship to Microsoft. And it's like, oh shit. Like now we've got this big behemoth. I got nothing against Microsoft. I'm an investor in Microsoft, but they're a huge, powerful company.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, well, if he no longer has the obligation or responsibility towards social good, then it's really just his choice in terms of what direction he takes and how fast he develops, right? Without the security protocols. So there's that big existential kind of thought that nobody can do anything about. The more tangible, and this is well documented, from even before this generative AI boom, is bias within training models. Right.
Yeah, right.
A very, very clear and proven example is the experience of candidate applications. Right. There gets, all of these resumes getting sifted through, and I'm not sure if you can call this anecdotal when the sample size is so large, but people feeling like they need to change their names to like be looked at, or apply with your resume being in a certain format so that it doesn't get omitted by the algorithm, right? Like things like that are really important questions to address for society, for equity, but also not just for equity, but for the more profit motivated people. You want the best person for the job, regardless of what their name is or regardless of what their resume is. Right.
So, or the format that it's in.
Or the format.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. So those are kind of two examples of played out stereotype, what keeps me up at night, I suppose. But overall, when it comes to, my experience with the tools, I've been happy. Right.
That's generally what we're hearing from everyone, right? Is that there are some fears, but the general experience with AI, the impact that it's having is a huge net positive. Not only does it save people time and effort, but it's genuinely fun to use these things, and it's always, there's always something around the corner that just surprises you and takes your sort of breath away, to a degree.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. but the ride is always fun until it's not. So we'll
Yeah,
see
right,
in
yeah.
a couple of years.
That is true. That is true. Yeah. Hopefully the fun lasts until after arrives.
Yeah.
Ceased
I'm being
using
I'm being a little
technology.
I'm being a little facetious. I think overall it's like positive, really positive, and especially this phase that we're in, right? Like to be able to like essentially get superpowers, like
Yeah.
the average person to be able to do things better. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
one of the things I was reading today as well was, as this is kind of a tangent, it's that the Elon Musk, the Neuralink or whatever it's
Mhm.
called,
Yeah.
when that starts to interface with these AIs and you have genuine like augmented intelligence, I don't know. On one hand, it's going to make us able to do so much more, but I fear that on the other hand, on the other side of things, it's going to make our actual cognitive abilities decline quite a lot because we are outsourcing so much that we don't need to do it, and our brains will just, I don't know, turn to mush.
Yeah.
I
I mean,
I
I'll
kind of
finally have the
agree.
appearance of being able to do math, though, which will be fantastic.
Yeah, but it's
people will be able
like,
to ask me any question, and boom.
Well,
since everyone can get cars and all that, people generally tend to be less fit, right? So
Right.
so it's the same as if you can use other things to do your thinking for you, then you're going to be less intelligent, I think.
you're using that muscle less, and I think we've seen. I think that we've seen a little bit of this already. I remember before my wife and I got married. This is we were living in South Africa still, like 2014. We were having this conversation about whether the advent of Google made people smarter or less smart. And my argument was, when I was in college, I would go to the library. The act of picking out books, scanning through, going through these different sources, verifying sources, multiple sources, right? That process, I felt at the time, kind of made me better, made me learn
Sure.
more. Not necessarily
More
smarter, but like
well-rounded.
was a kind of a really good cognitive training exercise. And when you just Google something, the answer comes to you. There's less effort behind it.
Mhm.
And I think it was like a year or so ago. I can't remember what we were talking about, but Anna turned to me and she's like, "You remember that conversation?" It's like, I didn't agree with you then, but like, yeah, I agree with you now because I just can't retain information as well. Like, it's just
Right.
if I forget, I can just Google it again. So, Dean, I think you're onto something. I think you're onto something there.
I think it's the culmination of a long process, because I was reading a while ago. I was reading something that was saying that we tend to think of ourselves as more advanced, more developed these days, human beings, that is. But actually, when we lived in the forest and there was bears around every corner and wolves were biting us if we made a wrong move, then we had to be alert. We had to be we had genuine problems that we were solving that were life and death problems that we had to apply our brains to. And if we didn't get the answers right, we'd die. Whereas now our problems that we solve are so trivial that it doesn't really matter necessarily if we get them right or wrong. And our ability to problem solve because of that has declined again. So I feel as though we're just gradually becoming this race of outsourcing. I keep saying of outsourcing our everything to whether it's getting our food from shops rather than hunting for it or whatever, whether it's getting our safety, just being safe because we've got all these infrastructure in place, and now outsourcing our ability to learn to software. I mean, where's it end? Anyway, that is a tangent.
There's a balance though, right? Because because it's not too different. Like humans have been outsourcing tasks to tools forever, and then some of those tools enable tasks they weren't able to do previously, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, which is like the hammer. But to what Awonke was saying, towards the beginning of our chat, was that there's an availability now of new time, effectively, to be able to do things that were more complicated. But to your point, Dean, it does rely on these systems to be there all the time, right? And like the Neuralink thing, like the thing that cracks me up is like, you can be as smart as you want until that thing has a 404 error and it can't reach the server. And now you have, your brain is offline, right? Like now what, So, and that might not matter if you're just out using it to take pictures with your eyes. But if you're using that for some really complicated, if you're using that for brain surgery and suddenly that connection's gone and you have no knowledge of brain surgery, otherwise, like, I'm sorry, but that patient's probably not going to make it. Yeah. So it's an interesting balance, right? Between like how much maybe that's really the split between the kind of automation versus the AI piece, right? Like one thing is sort of a compilation of tools that are helping you do something versus the other is deciding whether or not you should do it at all. It's a little bit of a binary, but.
So Awonke, we're kind of coming to the end now. It's been an absolutely fantastic conversation. To finish off with, do you have any advice that you would give for any of the listeners who are looking to, get into being, an AE, or just in general, how they can use AI to further their careers?
Yeah, I'll start with the last question first because I think it's a little bit easier, quite frankly. I think this is not going to be a controversial statement at all, but this type of technology, artificial intelligence, automation, it's here to stay. And I don't mean to be kind of trite when I say this, but the more, it's pretty simple to think that the more productive you can be and the more unique value you can bring to an organization, the more value you are, right? And so, to that organization at least. And so I would highly recommend that people familiarize themselves with these tools that are available for free or for close to free, and start kind of reading up and learning about them and playing with them like in their spare time. I shared the example about my account planning taking a month last year and taking just a week and a half. Like that is a huge edge. Now, in my company, not so much because everyone's doing it. But imagine if I was the only one not doing it, right?
Yeah.
And that's the thing. So it's like, don't, while these things are accessible, use them, familiarize them. Don't get intimidated because you no longer actually need to code. That's what makes it so great to like have access to these tools, and just read up and have fun with them. I suspect, and this goes into speculation now, but I suspect that being really good at prompting is going to be in the next 5 to 10 years, as far as specifically generative AI goes, is going to be much more valuable than many degrees, right? And you can learn that skill for free. So I would say dive head first in, As far as being an AE goes, I think that what has helped to set me apart a little bit in my career is that I truly believe in leading with some empathy and understanding where my client, a prospective client, is coming from and what they're trying to achieve. Some of my peers, not at UiPath, but I mean, maybe at UiPath, but just globally, my account executive peers, they are so focused on the short-term quarterly target number, etc., that they end up behaving in a way that brings our industry and our community into disrepute. And I think if you take a step back from the pressure and just put yourself out there and make your clients and prospective clients understand that you've got their best interests at heart, and you take the time to get to learn their business and truly understand how your solutions might apply to the problem, as opposed to having a solution then trying to find a problem, I think that makes all the difference in the world. And I think you'll find a lot more success than being a tactical, month to month, quarter to quarter account executive.
And one of that's interesting because it ties into something as well that we had in our conversation with Matt Sobel, which was, and actually with Sean Swenson, which was around using AI to either create or interrogate the personas, so you are well briefed on the type of questions that you need to ask, the things you should talk about, give you that chance to prep it with with some level of comfort, knowledge that you're actually prepping. The AI that you've developed is essentially replicating your customer, and you can try, will this work? Should I ask different questions? Are my assumptions about the customer correct? Anyway.
Yeah, I think that's really valuable. I think where you would need to be careful is over-indexing to assume that that model understands 100% that persona. But at least in Sobel's case, knowing where he works, I would assume that their models are pretty spot on. But yeah, the exciting thing, Dean, is that truly we're just figuring out, we're at the cusp of what's possible.
Yeah.
And that's what excites me, is that I don't even know a year from now if we're having the same conversation whether I'd say the same thing, right? That's how fast things are moving.
Let's book
I'd love to. I think this has been a great conversation.
On the books,
it has. It's been fantastic. I think that's a great place to end the conversation. So, Awonke, thank you very much for your time. It's been brilliant.
Yeah. Thanks for having me, gentlemen. Appreciate it.
All right. Welcome back, everybody. We've arrived at the part of the show that Dean and I like to call the debrief, where we dive into some of the highlights of the conversation that we just had with Awonke. So I'm going to start off this time, Dean. I'm fascinated by Awonke's sort of definition and split between automation versus artificial intelligence. I thought, kind of a complicated set of differences, but effectively like this idea about decision making versus kind of compounding a task is sort of the
God, I'm doing that again. When I was starting off in my career in software, which was like my third career, I was a tester, and I did test automation. That involved whether it was visit websites or certain applications like SAP or whatever. Then you would run scripts which would automate user processes going through their end-to-end process, essentially, for regression testing. And there was obviously no artificial intelligence in that at all, but there was, the automation itself was really saved a lot of time, because otherwise you'd have a manual tester having to run through these processes over and over and over again. So, the idea of automation obviously is, and as Awonke said, that idea has been there for ages. But then to couple that with AI, to add that intelligence to it, it opens up a whole new area of efficiency and, outsourcing the whole process and even less human interaction.
Right, which I loved his position on that. I mean, granted, he is someone who's very skilled.
He sells it, right?
This. Yeah, right. But the idea that it's not replacing anybody, but it's sort of enabling their kind of superpowers, or getting rid of the mundane. Like him going from a month of account planning to a week is, you could argue that's more on the artificial intelligence side than the kind of automation, but I imagine there's a lot of things where it's I got to go through.
I imagine it, and
exactly, lots of stuff that is mundane.
Yeah, I think the more we can remove mundane tasks from our lives, I think it's more of an opportunity. I see it as more of an opportunity than a threat, and I do know that a lot of people worry about, okay, well, my job is mostly mundane things, so if they were taking all these things out, then what am I left to do? But trust me, there's always new things to learn to do. You look at when software came in, the amount of people who had to pivot roles, but actually the jobs that they were doing became a lot more fulfilling, a little bit more fulfilling at least. Probably less risk of paper cuts as well. But I do think that the benefits of AI far outweigh any potential threats to people's job security.
Yeah, and I think that the idea that AI is going to come in and replace sort of my job, I think is a little bit of a narrow-minded view, because that assumes that there's no context around you that's also changing, right? Yeah. Like new roles show up as a result of other technologies and vice versa. So there's always something where one skill kind of pivots into the next, and it's
about evolving to become to using your skills and using your talent to become that orchestrator, that manager of your own squad, as I mentioned previously, of AIs, So you have the domain knowledge and you're able to leverage AIs to do a lot of the work for you. That's the boring work, but it gives you more time and more freedom to be strategic and really maximize your skill set.
Right. I mean, I think they use the term, I think it was AI workforce or like digital workforce or something, where it feels like a body of people who are doing
to
stuff.
give each one a name.
Yeah, and I kind of like that. I think I like
do.
the
I
idea
like
that it gives us some personality.
Give it a name and give it a role, and then that allows people to know, to identify with it, to understand who, in inverted commas, is doing the job and what their role is. So you understand the limitations of that AI, what it's capable of, and what you can ask it to do. It's not just this black box of wonder and magic that people assume can do so much or don't really understand its skill set. To give it a name and a role really boxes it, so it's nice. And I'll go to whatever you call it,
Steve,
AI. I'll
or
go to
whatever it is.
I was going to go with Hal, but maybe that's a bad choice. Yeah. Okay. Mother. I mean, we'll go with Mother.
Oh God, Mother. Yeah, that's intense. Yeah. I mean, I think that there's something interesting about the idea that these things start to become a part of a personality of someone who built it as well, right? Like, I would imagine that in the instance that Awonke provided of sort of like doing the end of year account analysis, that's done through a particular mindset or a way of doing it. So the person who's going to train that automation bot is going to do it through that same one. So I could imagine that, even internally at a company, you end up with like kind of like internal marketplace of people's bots, which are really processes that can be implemented and tried and tested a lot faster than it would take you to like turn over the machine shop's processes from one year to another, right? It would be massive endeavor. But
and it's, I suppose it links into a conversation that we had with Matt, which was around the prompt engineering. So it's prompt engineering versus having a lot of that context information already built in. So abstracting away from the prompt engineering and just telling the AI to do something, and it already has that context built in. Right. Where's the real line? Because with prompt engineering, with building your own sort of AIs, with giving it all that information from you personally, you get that helper that you really want, that understands exactly your processes, that does things your way. On the other hand, if you abstract away from the prompt engineering and have all that context pre-built, preloaded, then you're going to get a more standard approach across an industry, which might be more predictable. But is it going to have that unique? Is it going to bring what a unique person would bring to a role?
Right. Like, at what point does the knowledge of everything else sort of? You
don't need to be like homogenized. You need to have. You kind of want to have different views and different voices, and so therefore, do you want to have does the AIs that every AI that you're interacting with, should that carry a bit of your personality or your style with it?
Like, I mean, in a way, I think intrinsically probably some of it does, but even in the way that it responds or the way that you interface with it, like, interface came up with the conversation with Matt as well, with Awonke saying, like, we use APIs to interface with a lot of these things, where some of it's a chatbot, they're using, but that's going to evolve as well. I mean, one of the other things I thought was really fascinating was his kind of notion and way to point out where the bias of these platforms come into play. And even when we presented this idea, like, well, Sean's been using this to kind of test a scenario that he can kind of work with. He's like, well, assuming it knows that. And it was like, that's true. That's true. Like, there's certainly a boundary, but I could see at an enterprise scale for training a sales team of that size, that you might make a bot that is a devil's advocate, based on all of your competitors' information or something. But fascinating stuff, honestly.
Yeah, I think that the subject of AI bias, it's so fascinating. It's, I guess that it's like any sort of bias as well. Like, who is the arbiter of absolute truth, right? Like, there's always bias in every single situation, and there's no objective truths. Well, okay, so there are some objective truths, right? But there are very few objective truths compared to how many subjective sort of truths and viewpoints there are. So it's a really deep subject to get into in terms of bias, in terms of, well, it probably can only be biased, right? You can't be neutral. It's very difficult to have a neutral stance.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean,
that's something we need to dive into, I think.
We should. And I think Awonke is a good person to really go into that, because he's done a lot of that research from his previous career as well, kind of how he was positioning some of the market research tools that he was selling, which have inherent bias, and even the sample that you use or whatever. So yeah, definitely.
Yeah, I think we need to get a philosopher on to talk about
that'd be good.
The philosophy of ethics and bias. So
and then ask him the guilt question. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
All right, should we wrap it up?
Yeah, let's do it.
All right, here we go. And that's a wrap on another episode. Thanks so much for joining us on the AI Impact Podcast, where we dive into how AI has impacted real people and real jobs. As usual, be sure to tell your friends and share us with your networks. You can find us on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. Be sure to follow and subscribe so you don't miss the next one of our episodes, wherever that may be. Thanks so much. I'm George Little.
And I'm Dean Hansen.
There we go. We nailed it this time. Thanks so much, everybody. Talk soon.